A big thank you to all my patrons who support the Engineered Mind podcast.
Hi and welcome to the Engineered Mind podcast episode 70. In this podcast we cover topics such as engineering, artificial intelligence, neuroscience, life, and other interesting topics and fascinating ideas to educate, inspire and engineer people's minds all around the world. I'm your host Joseph, and for this episode of the podcast I'm very happy to welcome Mike Cavaliere to my show. Mike is a 20-year veteran of full-stack web development. He's a senior software engineer at Echobind and author of Cut into the Jamstack, build and deploy a full-stack application using React and Next.js. In this podcast, we talked about the Jamstack and what it actually means, Next.js, React and other frameworks, his book Cut into the Jamstack, Mike's learning disability and how he improved his memory using special techniques, and much more. If you are an inquisitive scientist and a thinker and would love to learn more about upcoming projects, courses, and attend live reading group sessions from experts in the industry and academia, register for free at community.sci-circle.com. To join my newsletter engineeredmind.sh with more than 1,500 readers coming out every Sunday, where I share exclusive weekly insights, visit yusef.substack.com. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here's my podcast with Mike Cavaliere. Okay, Mike, welcome to the show. It's really a pleasure to have a Jamstack expert on my show today. So what is actually Jamstack? We don't know yet because a lot of the audience are actually engineers or AI enthusiasts, but you will explain to us what Jamstack actually means. But before that, can you give us like a quick bio of yourself, like who's Mike and what do you actually do?
Of course, yeah. Thanks for having me, Joseph, by the way. So I'm Mike Cavaliere. I'm currently a senior engineering strategist at a company called Echobind. I've spent the last 20 years my career as a software engineer building websites, full stack web applications, mobile applications, microservices, just kind of running the gamut of technology. And right now at Echobind, I do a fair bit of engineering, supporting others, teaching, and helping clients plan their projects and making sure that they're building the right things for the goals, and sometimes making sure they're not building things that are going to cost way more and not have an effect. So it's hence the strategy title.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Cool stuff. Yeah, about the learning aspect there, you have a very beautiful story to share, but we'll talk about that at a later point of the podcast, so we'll keep that at the end. About Jamstack, can you maybe explain to people, and also myself, because I'm an expert in this field, what is Jamstack? Sure. What is this thing called Jamstack?
Of course. So Jamstack is a term that was coined by the Netlify CEO a while back to describe a web architecture that was already kind of gaining popularity, but it didn't have a name for it. So the JAM is an acronym for JavaScript, APIs, and Markup. And the architecture is it's a little different than it's very different than a more traditional architecture that we had in the early 2000s. The advent of Ruby on Rails and Django and other like web frameworks, the way they would build web apps and the way they would work is when a user visited a URL on the web app, there would be a request that goes through the application stack. So if you're working with Ruby on Rails, it makes a request to Ruby and all its middlewares. And then Ruby makes some backend requests, interacts with the database, and it generates ultimately an HTML page that gets rendered to the user, which is valuable and powerful. But as time went on, we realized that making that same process every time you'd make a request wasn't necessarily the most efficient way of doing things, because a lot of times the result is going to be the same. So, we ended up utilizing caching on different levels, both database caching, middleware caching, and application caching, and ultimately like cloud caching, like Cloudflare. You cache the result of the HTML page in order to speed up the serving to users. The Jamstack approach basically does that HTML render at build time while the developer is working on it, or deploy time when it's going up to the server. So ultimately for this pages that don't change very often, you're just sending an HTML static file to the server to save all that calculation on every request. And what it does in addition to that, it leverages APIs. So that's the markup part. JavaScript, because a lot of it's all written in JavaScript for the most part, and uses JavaScript in the page to request from an API the data that you need for the dynamic portions of the page, and the rest stays static. So ultimately, you can build a Jamstack site and host it on something like Amazon S3, which is just files. And because it's getting all of its data from the API, everything is stored elsewhere. So, the benefits of it end up being, number one, speed. Jamstack sites render really fast. In addition to that, your hosting costs go down because you're starting with less server-related stuff. And quite often the APIs that you leverage use serverless. So serverless technology is fast, and it's a lot cheaper than traditional servers that you have to maintain 24/7. So, and there's a security benefit too, because you're kind of reducing your footprint. There's less interaction with the server except through the API, as opposed to like the generation of the whole page. So it has a lot of benefits, and developers tend to really like it because the tools that we have out there have really good developer experience as well. Next.js, Gatsby, and a number of others.
Mm-hmm. What about, is it specifically like tailor-made for SaaS applications, this Jamstack, or can you use it also for different things?
No, quite the opposite. Initially, I believe it came about mostly for websites in general, because if you've got a website and not necessarily an application, there's less parts that move on the fly. Even a CMS-driven website, like a WordPress website, you've got everything in a database, but it doesn't change unless somebody is editing it on the back end, and then it's up to date, so it can be cached a lot easier. So it started, I believe, as most common for like websites themselves, but nowadays people using it for full-blown applications. And myself, like I look at it as the stack to go through for applications of any kind on the web, including software as a service applications.
I see. Yeah, when I look at the website also where you offer your course, this kind of things that you're teaching or frameworks that you're teaching include React, Chakra, Next, Prisma, and so on. Could you explain, like, especially the things that you are teaching on your website, what are they useful for? For example, React is something, some people might heard of it, like React, okay, tells me something, but I don't actually know what it means. Can you like explain these different parts that you teach in your course, basically, or in your book?
Sure, absolutely. So React is a JavaScript web framework that was built by Facebook, which is they term it as a library for user interfaces. So it allows you to build websites or web applications in an enjoyable manner, very fast performing manner, and a modular manner. So you can, React is like an alternative to things like Angular and some of the other web frameworks that are out there. It's very popular among engineers and among enterprises as well now. And one of the perks is that it, before React and before the JavaScript framework that we have now, it was very common to manipulate the DOM of the web page. So if I wanted to do something on a web page, I would run kind of a query in JavaScript, and I would look for all of the elements of the type paragraph, like the paragraph tags, and I would manipulate them in that way. I would look for them, and then I would do something with them. React is really fast because it keeps kind of a shadow copy in memory of the elements on the web page, and you can do all types of calculation, manipulation, pulling from APIs and everything before it even touches the page. Mm-hmm. And when it does update the page, it does it in a very fast manner. So it's really fast and really easy to work with. So that's React. Mm-hmm. One of the other major tools that I'm teaching about is Next.js, which is a framework for the web that includes React inside of it, but it adds a number of things to it. It adds, for one, a server-side component, so you can write API calls, database functions, serverless. You can develop APIs with it internally that operate on serverless by default. So they're very fast. They work on very cheap or free hosting, and they work really well with the front end with React in a bundled manner. So you can be developing a full stack application with it, and it'll all live update on your developer machine very quickly. So the developer experience is very good. But another thing that's great about Next.js is it generates static websites by default. So let me take a step back. So developing pages in Next.js is really easy too. So if I have a website that has like dynamic pages that pulls in content from a bunch of places, all I do is create a file, and now my page is there. I put one line in it, it's pulling from an API. I put another line, it's generating content. The minute I push it to a server, Next.js is automatically creating static files out of it, unless I tell it not to. And so that, combined with a number of other perks that Next.js has, it's built for making your websites and web applications very, very fast by default. And when I say that, like my website for the book, the cutintothejamstack.com, is built on Next.js. And if you run it through like any of the performance tools that are out there, like Google PageSpeed Insights, Lighthouse, and some of the other common ones, it gets very high scores. And that's because it's using Next.js to keep everything static generated, and have the images, automatically resized and cached. Like that's another thing Next.js does by default. So it's built so that you have automatic speed and automatically good SEO right out of the door without having to do too much work. So that's Next.js. So we got React, Next.js. The other things that I'm teaching are just part of the stack that I use to develop websites that cover a couple of other things. Chakra UI is a great UI framework for React user interface. And it just has pre-made components that you can kind of drop in and, apply design to your web app without having to do a lot of design work. Especially me, like I don't have a really good sense of design. So it kind of helps somebody like me before I can pull in a designer to help me out, where I could just, I could put an avatar component on a page. I can build a table with the data that I'm pulling out from the API without having to do too much thinking. So, and it's very flexible, so you can style and theme things however you want. And then using a couple of other libraries on there. NextAuth is a authentication library for Next.js that makes it really easy to have like one-click sign into your app with Google or Facebook. You just put it in and you go, and the users can sign up. And then Prisma is a fantastic ORM, object relational mapping. It's a tool for interacting with databases. So in apps that I've built and in the book, Prisma makes it very easy to define your relational database, how you want it to look, and then apply it and then interact with it really easily. And I've used like so many of these ORMs over the years in different technologies, and like PHP, Ruby on Rails, and this Prisma is like the next evolution of them. I think it gives you a very clean way of working with databases. Those are the major ones. I think I covered everything. Let me just
Railway,
sure.
React hook form Vercel, if I pronounce it correctly, I think.
Oh yeah. So React hook form is just a form library for React, for building input forms, and it's very fast and it's very easy to use. And there are a number of them out there, but that's the one that renders the fastest. Vercel is the company that created Next.js, but they are also a serverless hosting platform. Mm-hmm. And I deploy my applications to it. It's very fast and has a free plan, which is great if you're building your own SaaS application and you don't want to spend any money on it. It's super easy to use. And then Railways is a new company. They're out west and in San Francisco, I believe, and they have a free plan for database hosting. So that's why I'm using them in this book.
This is so cool. Yeah, thanks for explaining that, Mike. And I think paying like $10 for the book is, I think, a no-brainer. And everyone who's interested in the Jamstack should definitely get it. And I'll put the link down in the description if you want to get it. One question, though, for the engineering and AI audience, could you theoretically, having the Jamstack, build kind of a dashboard? So you do calculations, for example, machine learning calculations on AWS, and you could basically pull them on your website?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. and I've worked with companies that do that as well. At Echobind, we've applied Next.js front end or Jamstack front ends for many types of applications. Some of them are in the Web3 space and crypto. But for all traditional type of companies as well. So anything that you have running on a server anywhere that you can attach an API to can have a Jamstack layer built onto it, and it'll speed it up. You could also do real-time things with the Jamstack as well. So if you have any kind of real-time feed, running through a WebSocket connection, you can integrate that with the Jamstack web application.
That's so cool. Wow, I'm really inspired by this. So also, is it mainly because of speed that one would use the Jamstack? Is it about building things faster, or is there other very important aspects to it?
Yeah, there are a number. So website performance is the big one that I mentioned. Yeah. SEO, search engine optimization, because your pages are rendering to HTML, they're going to be a little easier for Google to index, and you have full control of the markup. So that's another big one. I also mentioned security earlier, because you're reducing the code footprint to the API. It's not easy to hack an HTML page, but the things that you're pulling into it are the things that are more hackable. So there's an added security benefit. UI is another one. So for Next.js, the user interfaces you're allowed to build, having these image components in there, and there's a benefit to the way you develop the interfaces and the and the accessibility too, particularly with the chakra that I'm using. It's built for accessibility, and these things help your SEO score in turn. But they also help your user experience, because they're going to be friendlier and quicker on mobile, which is a big deal to both Google and to users. Everybody wants to use mobile. And then another one that I can't stress enough is DX, developer experience. When you're developing things, particularly as an individual developer, if it's your project or your SaaS application, but anytime, whether you're working for a big company or a small company, developer experience is crucial, because you want to enjoy what you're doing. And the more you do and the quicker you're able to develop things, the happier you are as a developer and the more productive you are as a developer. And the developer experience in the Jamstack, particularly with this stack, with Next.js and some of these other tools, is astounding. It's so enjoyable to work with, because you can generate an app in Next.js with one command, and it develops the whole shell of a GitHub repository for you with all the tools that you need to get started, including a local server, hot reloading. So anytime you change anything on the front of the back end, it's instantly updated in your browser, and they make changes. They make speed improvements this often. The people at Vercel who work on Next.js are married to speed. They're using this tagline let's make the web faster, and so many websites that are deployed on it are lightning quick. So the developer experience of this is great, because you get instantaneous reward, whether you're working on the front end or the back end portion. You don't have to sit around and wait for code to be refreshed. So and just the interface with the code itself, the APIs that you use are really enjoyable to work with. So those are a lot of the benefits that come to mind.
Oh, that's so cool. I learned a lot now, Mike. Thanks a lot for explaining this in so much
My
detail.
pleasure.
When it comes to your book, who should get the book? Is it more for beginners, more for intermediate users, or maybe, what do you actually build with the book? Is it a project-based book?
Yeah, it is. So it's the experience range is pretty wide. I've gotten people. Sorry, I think I tapped my mic and cut off for a second.
No, you're back. Should be back, right?
I'm back. Okay.
Yeah, you're back.
So the experience range is pretty wide. I've had people who are engineering managers who benefited from it, but I've also had people who were very beginner benefited from it, and everything in between. The only prerequisite for getting value out of the book is that you have a little comfort with JavaScript itself. So I tell people in the beginning of the book, there's a couple of concepts that, I'm not explicitly teaching in the book, that are, like JavaScript basics. You should know how to create variables and data with JavaScript. You should know how to fetch data with promises and async await in JavaScript. But I talk about those things at the beginning. So if you do get the book, I mean, it's, like you said, it's $10 right now. It's going to be going up soon, but it is $10 right now, and it's a great value for it. So like you can pick up those things like relatively quickly if you have any engineer experience at all. So yeah, experience range is very broad. And any level of developer will get a lot of experience from it. It is a very hands-on approach to learning. So essentially, I'm building this app in the book and showing you how I'm building it. And the app is not typical. It's a collaborative photo gallery application. Mm-hmm. So the idea was that it's kind of like a Google Photos or Apple Photos app, simplified, but also, enough that like it was something for me to build for my own use, for my wife and I to collaborate on photo galleries with our kids. We have 2 sons, and take photos of them all the time, and just want to be able to like both add photos to a gallery and share it with some relatives. So the app that you'll build takes you through first, setting up a database and interacting with it. You create information, you read information with this stack, and then we get progressively more complicated. Once you have database information in there and create, read, update, delete for the data, then you start adding an API integration with it. We use the Cloudinary API for images. So then you connect with the API, and now you're creating data in your database, and you're uploading and retrieving photos from the Cloudinary API. And then you add some user interface on it, and now you have a photo gallery. And then you add in some sharing features, and then you add in user authentication so people can log in and log out and see only what's associated with them. So it takes a very practical approach to building a full stack web application, and it's very hands-on. So you get the full code for the major lessons with the book, but then in the document for the book, I'll give you a little bit of background, and it's like a paragraph on, okay, here's what we're going to do now, and here's how we do it. And I'll essentially like give you a couple of steps, and then here's the code, and here's the breakdown of the code, more or less line by line. And so you're learning by taking the code that I've given you, writing it yourself, and then understanding what each line does. And then as you go through the book, you're accumulating information about every one of these tools: React, Next.js, Vercel, Railway, and all that. So it's very hands-on, and it touches on all these major areas that you'll use when building a real web application. So you're going to pick up a lot by reading the book.
This is great. Apart from your great book, of course, are there any other resources you would recommend from yourself? I think you also have some information on your website. But that's like, do you have your own podcast, by the way?
Yeah. So, well, I don't have my own podcast, no. I would love to one day, but I have no time for it at the moment. But I do have. So if you go to the cut-in, if you sign on to the Cut Into the Jamstack email list, I send out resources all the time for podcasts. So I'll be sending out an email about this podcast as well, and other presentations that I'm giving. Mm-hmm. If you Google my name, you'll find some podcasts out there that I've been on recently. But as far as actually, I lost track. I'm sorry. What was the question you asked me? I think I went off on a tangent.
Other resources that you would recommend?
Oh, other resources. So the email list is good because I will be sending you stuff. If you go to the Echobind blog, blog.echobind.com, there's a lot of articles that I and others have written. Some of them touch on the Jamstack, others touch on React Native, and React and a number of other technologies. We have a lot of good information on there. On cutintothe.jamstack.com's newsletter, I'll be eventually sending out more lessons there as well. And putting up blog posts that are directly related to the technologies in the book. So I'm going to be, the book goes through the process of building this app, but I think there's other pieces of information and basics that I'll be putting on the website so people get, a little more in-depth understanding of the things that I touch on in the book if they want it. And in fact, if you want to see content related to the book, like, email me, and I'll make a note of it and then eventually write a blog post about it. But those are a couple of places that you can go to get more information. You can also email me.
Cool stuff. Apart from that, any other last or closing remarks on the Jamstack before we move to the topic of learning, Mike?
No, I just, if you're a web developer or engineer of any kind, learn some of the basics because you'll be able to use it in so many ways. It's really valuable to learn.
Really cool stuff. And everyone listening to this podcast, I think Mike did a podcast, 2 or 3 months ago, where he even demonstrated this web application with the photo album that you mentioned. I think you'll find it on YouTube, typing in Mike Cavaliere, and then you find a presentation.
Yeah, I think it was the Prisma conference, the Prisma Day conference,
I think so, yeah.
where I walked. Actually, that's a good one to check out if you want to learn more about the stack and about the book, because I use the app from the book as an example, and I talk about some of the perks of using this stack. So more detail on the things that I taught you, but you can see code and you can see examples of it.
Yeah, I will link it down in the description. Thank you so much, Mike. So
Sure.
We'll talk about teaching, and I'll quote you here. I found a beautiful quote from you. Personally, 14 years ago, I learned that I had a learning disability and that there were things about my brain that just were not optimal. My brain is like Ferrari that goes very slow. And there are certain things that are really strong about it, certain things that leave a little to be desired. So I went down the rabbit hole of finding all the ways that you can improve this. You can improve the hardware of your brain to the point where things like this aren't a problem anymore, and you can take it a lot further. So Mike, how did you approach or overcome your learning disabilities and actually became so efficient?
Well, so it's an ongoing process. I always reiterate that, but because there's the dream goal of like where my brain will be. If anybody's seen the Limitless movie, it's like I use that as a future goal, right? If anybody hasn't seen that and you're listening to a podcast about learning, watch Limitless with Bradley Cooper. It's phenomenal. But anyway, the guy takes a pill that makes him many, many miles smarter than he was. And it makes his brain superhuman. What I found was that the brains that we have, a brain is an organ. It's a part of your body, right? It develops initially due to your environment, right? Like, your parents, the nutrition that you have growing up, the experiences that you run into, and it gets to a certain place. And, we utilize it how we instinctively utilize it. Quite often most people do not sit down and think about what areas are strong and what areas are weak. So me, when it was, 15 some odd years ago when I got diagnosed, I already had a sense that there was something a little different because there were certain things that just took me a long time and then they didn't seem like they should. When I got diagnosed, it was like a light bulb went off, and it made so much sense because my overall intelligence was very high, but I saw that, processing speed was very low, and certain things were memory was really, not anywhere near the rest of my intelligence where the average should be. But then there were other things that surprised me in some ways. It was that my verbal ability was extremely high. My ability to write was neurologically very, very good. And I realized at that point in my career, I was not utilizing it effectively. Like I was, building software, but I wasn't using writing as a tool. And, a number of years ago, I started using that a whole lot more. And you can see now, like, the book was just one example, but I have dozens of blog posts out there. And it comes in handy in so many other ways. As far as expanding the brain itself, I took a look at the areas that were weak. Memory, processing speed, visual attention, auditory attention. These are things that they can actually measure. And I looked out there for ways to improve them. And there's plenty of research. There aren't magic wands necessarily, but there's actually a lot you can do. It starts with certain foundations. So sleep, exercise, nutrition, and I would say mental well-being are like the first three are the foundation, but then mental well-being is a close fourth one. Those things are baselines, and if you look at those carefully, and see if any of those are impaired or not as good as they could be. By doing more to improve those, you will see your cognitive ability goes up. So in my case, through testing, I found out that I had multiple sleep disorders, and the impact of my negative sleep on my cognitive ability was significant. So by doing the things that are necessary to improve my sleep, and so my sleep environment, my sleep hygiene, making sure it was dark and had white noise in my room, correcting my sleep apnea. I did something for my sleep apnea. Combined all those things, and my sleep quality overall went up. It's not perfect, but it went up so much that my alertness during the day was far better. My attention was far better. My memory and organization were far better. Exercise, integrating exercise even a little bit more on an average basis, particularly cardio, because cardio, it contributes to the genesis of new neurons in your brain. It facilitates blood flow to the brain and the rest of your body. But exercise in general, but particularly cardio, it increases not just your mental alertness and your energy, but it does a wonderful amount of things for the other aspects of your brain, which contribute to cognition. So, and then nutrition. So nutrition contributes to your brain power in a huge way as well. If you're consuming a lot of things that contribute to poor attention, so there's a lot of sugar, a lot of processed foods, too much carbohydrates, those have the potential to slow you down. Mm-hmm. If you're not consuming enough healthy fat, then it's similar. Your brain needs that. It needs things like avocados and even like arguably animal fats, but like omega-3s are really important. So getting those things in line all contribute to you having a good foundational strength to your brain that isn't getting sucked down by like the garbage that's being put into your body and polluting it. So those three things along with mental well-being, because if you have too much toxic stress, that's also affecting your brain's ability to function like really well. So that's the foundation. Now, building on top of that, what I started to do over a decade ago was find all these ways, all these treatments for cognitive impairments, you could say, that can actually change the structure of the brain and improve it in these areas that I had deficits. So some of them I found to be really effective. One was called integrated listening systems, which has a good bit of research behind it, which the modality is really strange. You wear bone conduction headphones. The bone conduction headphones are what Google Glasses used to use, where essentially sound doesn't just get into your brain through your ears. It carries along the bones of your skull. Mm-hmm. So bone conduction headphones utilize that very subtle vibration along the bones of your skull to carry sound in. And what they also do is they stimulate your vestibular system. The vestibular system in your body is what determines your sense of balance. And it creates that sense of balance through a working relationship between the cerebellum in your brain, the fluid in your inner ear, and your eyes. And it's very odd, and I don't know if I can really break it down scientifically, but these three inputs or these three parts send signals to your brain that say, okay, this way is up and this way is down. And what the bone conduction headphones do, and an integrated listening system uses the bone conduction headphones combined with specially engineered music, Mozart music and Gregorian chant. And you do balance exercises and visual stimulation exercises along with them, and coordination exercises. What all this does is it trains the balance system of the brain, along with some other aspects of the brain that I don't fully understand, and it improves your visual and auditory ability. So if you have a deficit that a learning deficit that involves the eyes or the ears, which a lot of learning disabilities do. Your learning problems, if you think about it, like when you're learning something, it's affected by your eyes and ears because that's where we're getting information from. A lot of people with learning problems have problems with their eyes and ears, and they're not typical. They're not something that will come up on a vision test or an ear test. That actually happened to me a lot of times. When I was younger, I would have problems understanding things, and they would do ear tests on me, and my ears were fine. The problem comes sometimes with your brain's ability to distinguish the sounds, like in my case. That's called auditory discrimination. Visual motor, if your eyes aren't reading across the page in an effective manner, then that's contributing to your ability to learn through reading. And I've done eye tracking studies on this too. You could see that my eyes didn't grow across the page the way a normal person should. Yeah. So visual motor skills, visual discrimination skills, auditory discrimination skills, your eyes and ears, if they're not working optimally, can decrease your ability and efficiency of learning. So integrated listening systems is one tool that can improve those things. So again, it's, the bone conduction headphones and the Gregorian chant and the Mozart, and stimulating your vestibular system to help your eyes and ears function at a granular level much better. And that's just one example. I've tried a lot of modalities to improve like the different aspects of my learning ability. Brain training through a lot of different softwares was another one. And there are a number out there. But all that long-winded explanation is just to say that, like, if you feel like you want to improve certain aspects of your brain, whether it's because you think you have a deficit or you just want to make it better, there are ways to do it out there.
This was very insightful, Mike. Thank you so much for sharing. And I think maybe there are coders out there listening to this podcast who have the same situation or problems that you had. Maybe they take away something from it. And I think even on your website, you have a few blog posts tackling this issue, right?
Yes, on my other website. So I do have a website called ADHDTechies.com, which I started many years ago when I went down this path of, for one, learning more about my brain and where it's strong, where it could be improved, improving my brain through multiple ways, by really adapting and changing it with hard effort and certain techniques, but also using certain ways to compensate it for it in alongside it. So like you'll see that on ADHDTechies.com that I have articles for programmers with learning challenges. And I have a bunch of core articles that I've answered about that. But there's also like this brain development stuff, and then there's like tricks and hacks for your attention and your brain. So if you're a software person with ADHD or a learning challenge, then it'll be really helpful to you. But if you're anybody that wants to utilize your brain in a better or different manner, check it out. It might be useful to you.
I'm definitely checking it out, Mike. Super cool. Very, very insightful. Thank you so much. To close this podcast, or this very beautiful podcast and this session, can you give us like maybe a routine that you do before maybe jumping straight into coding, maybe in the morning? Is there like a specific routine you have?
Yes, coffee. But no, honestly, taking a walk. So I have an office that's about 10 or 12 minutes walk from my home. And that walk combined with sometimes like focus music and sometimes just regular music is potent, because at the very least it's getting you going somehow. I'd love to do, I don't have really time these days, but I'd love to do cardio exercise first thing in the morning. And sometimes I do that, and that's even better. I'll take my sons to daycare and I'll jog with the stroller and I'll get my heart rate up, because that's getting your brain going in the morning. And so that's one of the best things you can do. And then a lot of times when I get into the office, I will start with the creative work first, which is something I learned from Tim Ferriss, the author of the 4-Hour Workweek. And so many other entrepreneurs talk about this out there, where you start the day with creative work, because that's like a good gear for your brain to be really effective. And I'll add the caveat that if you've had a good night's sleep and you've done a little bit of movement in the morning, your brain will be ready for it. If you're still dragging, it's going to be very hard. But it's also more enjoyable than the boring work. So it's still a good thing to do first thing in the morning. So yeah, take a walk, get cardio if you can, and coffee never hurts. But dive into something that's creative. So the code project you're working on, the writing project you're working on, something where you're engaging your brain's ability to generate things and do things. And that's my favorite morning routine.
Great tips. Beautiful podcast, Mike. Thank you so much for sharing this story also with us and giving us insight into the Jamstack. So everyone listening to this podcast, I'll put every relevant link down in the description. And with that being said, I wish you best of luck and very much success with your book. And I'm sure I'm getting it myself as well, as long as it's like $10 only. So it's really a no-brainer.
Well, I'll give you a free copy, obviously.
Cool. Thank you so much.
But thanks so much for having me, Joseph. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mike. And I hopefully see you in the second part. Who knows?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much. Take care.
You too.